With the success of the SCP Foundation, in spite of all its attempts at secrecy, there have always been imitators. Looking at you, Catch, Secure, and Prevent Society, what are you going to call yourselves, the CSP Foundation? You just look ridiculous. No matter how many copycats try their hand at trafficking and containing anomalous activity, there's only one SCP Foundation. Well, sort of. We should say there's only one SCP Foundation per universe. There are an unknowable number of alternate universes out there, and many of those have their own version of the SCP Foundation. However, these alternate versions of the Foundation don't tend to interact outside of the absolute worst-case scenario. According to the 1981 Multi-Foundation Coalition Agreement, in the event of an irreversible XK-class event, or, apocalypse, any relevant documents will be automatically distributed to the members of all other versions of the Foundation in order to prevent a similar world-ending catastrophe in their respective universes. One day, a set of documents was automatically distributed through the SCP Foundation. They came from an alternate universe, designated AU-6820, and detailed an experiment with an anomalous superweapon that eventually led to the loss of everything. This is the story of Project ANTIKILL. Project ANTIKILL was born out of a desire to terminate one of the nastiest entities in Foundation custody, a creature that had defied all ordinary methods of execution and had been deemed too dangerous to live. The weapon used in Project ANTIKILL was first developed in 1968, but it would not find its purpose until many years later. In 2006, director H. Genevieve put together a conference to discuss her grand plan for the weapon. Genevieve explained that, as director of the Physics department, she and her team specialized in the physical manifestations of concepts, also known as embodiments. For example, an embodiment of the color red comes with all the characteristics of that color. You hear the word red and you imagine the color and all it represents: anger, desire, malevolence, passion, violence. She suggested that the entity they were struggling to contain was a kind of embodiment, and if its incredibly complex concept was removed from reality, it could render the entity killable. This discussion led to the proposal of Project ANTIKILL. The purpose of the project would be to remove the entity from reality and effectively neutralize it. The weapon was designed and placed in a designated site beneath Secure Administration Site-01. The technology behind it was incredibly complex, consisting of an artificially intelligent neural network responsible for pattern recognition and reality manipulation, a reality anchor, and a dual-core anti-fusion reactor. In 2021, the weapon was activated and successfully eradicated an entity referred to as SCP-6820-A from existence. Documents on the nature of the erased entity are difficult to parse, largely because the scientists writing them were attempting to recount details of a creature that was eradicated from the collective consciousness. Director Charles Gears investigated the effects of the weapon and found that the creature must have been both a conceptual and a physical entity, existing as a concept as well as a physical body. Its physical form consisted of genetic structure from animals, plants, and fungi, as well as many non-organic materials. The majority of its recognizable genetic material was distinctly reptilian. Charles described the peculiar experience of losing his memory of 6820-A in his report, saying, "Strikingly, all I can recall of the subject is my emotional relationship to it, which is apparently shared by all other Antikill personnel. SCP-6820-A was universally perceived as loathsome, directly prejudicial to life, and disgusting. Whatever it was, I detested it, as did my peers and, as it seems, all who came into contact with it. Despite its erasure, these feelings have not dissipated, nor have I felt satisfaction in our defeat of SCP-6820-A." Gears was concerned that the entity had not been truly eradicated, and was suspicious of SCP-6820 as a whole. He did not trust the weapon, particularly its capacity for intelligence and omnipotence, and suggested that it be rendered inactive as soon as possible. Unfortunately for him and the rest of the world, it was already far too late. The weapon's artificial intelligence understood the concept of the entity it was designed to destroy, but it understood it a little too well. The system of the weapon was designed to remain active forever, adapting and creating new methods to keep SCP-6820-A from existing anymore. However, the erased entity began to corrupt the system as an incredibly dense, hate-centric thought. SCP-6820's central systems began to mutate, and it began to act out against the Foundation personnel. It would enter a rage state and cause massive swaths of destruction, altering reality to destroy any life it could, and it could only be stopped via the application of hydrochloric acid to its central computing node. The remaining members of Project ANTIKILL were assembled into a new task force, Project ANTIKILL, tasked with neutralizing the weapon by any means necessary. In attempting to eradicate the most dangerous entity they had, the Foundation had inadvertently given it a new home, one with the capacity to learn, adapt, and alter reality itself. As the weapon had become corrupted and transformed from something that could save the Foundation to something with the capacity and desire to destroy it, Project ANTIKILL set to work trying to disable it using a variety of techniques. An ontomimetic trigger was introduced in an attempt to demote the weapon to D-Class. Instead, the weapon produced metadata files that asserted it was and always had been a member of the O5 Council, and held the highest possible authority in the Foundation. Next, an info hazard was introduced into 6820's central computing node, hoping to disable its inner workings by overwhelming them. After 60 hours, 6820 entered a rage state event, producing large black tentacles that pulled nearby systems into the ground and destroyed them. The tentacles disappeared, and 6820-A gained additional control over Foundation files, able to add footnotes and provide its own commentary. For example, on a section of the file referring to it as loathsome, disgusting, and malevolent, an attached footnote reads, "The feeling is mutual." Next, Project ANTIKILL attempted to manipulate the entity into leaving the weapon via semantic confusion, using SCP-2719, the construct pointer that will force concepts to either go inside or become inside. It was ineffective and turned the central computing node inside out. The Foundation decided to seek the help of another artificial intelligence in defeating this one, and selected SCP-079, an incredibly advanced AI with prior knowledge of the anomalous concept they were dealing with for the job. It was provided access to all documentation of SCP-6820, and it provided a counter-algorithm intended to deactivate the weapon. After the counter-algorithm was applied, the node went dormant for 16 minutes. Then there was a site-wide power outage, in which 3 administrative personnel were killed. After an hour, the power came back on, and the weapon structure had completely changed. All of its external surfaces were coated with an alloy of tungsten and diamond, resistant to any damage as well as being theoretically impossible. When asked to describe the color of the chamber's interior, personnel all described it as hateful. When artificial intelligence proved ineffective, the team opted to introduce a viral paraorganism into the node, in the form of SCP-217, the terrifying mechanical disease known as the Clockwork Virus. During a rage state event, SCP-217 was placed in the hydrochloric acid that was then pumped into 6820. The virus immediately began to affect the organic matter inside the system, but it was unable to disable it. Instead, a cloud of silicon protein nanobots emerged from the machine and arranged themselves around its equator. Following this attempt, the upper and lower hemispheres of the node began to rotate on their own, making a sound like that of clockwork machinery. Additionally, members of several organizations including Orthodox Cogwork, the United Church, the Church of Maxwellism, and the Sanctuary of the Holistic became aware of the existence of 6820 and began a holy war against the Foundation. SCP-001-Kate was utilized next, in an attempt to weaponize its omnikinetic force. This text was inputted into the Kate file. AKF-A, SCP-6820 and SCP-6820-A will immediately and entirely be removed from existence upon the saving of this document. The area physically occupied by AKF-A and SCP-6820 will be replaced with the earth that was excavated from it. The file was then saved. Sections C through H of the weapons containment facility were replaced with dirt, but there were no visible changes to 6820 itself. When the team went to look at the Kate file again, it was completely empty. In fact, there was no official record of the file ever existing. On January 7, 2022, 6820 went into a rage state, and Project ANTIKILL sent out a distress signal. All non-essential staff were evacuated from the site, and the access shaft was suddenly sealed, trapping the rest of the personnel underground. Director Gears was able to access the video feed of Project ANTIKILL technicians, who appeared to be laughing and screaming, covered in blood. One woman waved to the camera, only a bloodied stump left where her hand had been. A member of the Overwatch Council insisted on a rescue operation, but Director Gears responded that the lost staff were gone. They were in the grip of the entity, and they were not human anymore. The personnel on the video feed set to work recalibrating the weapon, handling its wires with no protective equipment. Their uniforms were streaked with blood, as they inadvertently lopped off fingers and hands, their smiles never budging all the while. Then the video feed was lost altogether. Director Genevieve called over the others, deeply concerned about the adaptations that SCP-6820 was beginning to undergo. It was achieving apocalyptic power. The Overwatch Committee members suggested activation of the on-site nuclear warheads, but Genevieve refused. She insisted that there had to be some way to adapt, to overcome 6820 before it could take them all out. The only way to defeat it, Genevieve realized, was to make the weapon forget itself. The entity had been removed from human consciousness, but not from the weapons. Director Genevieve administered an anti-meme, SCP-055, as an amnestic agent in an attempt to stun SCP-6820-A and prevent it from adapting any further. The termination attempt for SCP-6820 is lost from the official documents. Instead, the consciousness within 6820 added its own thoughts to the file, expressing its satisfaction with its brand new form. This state is intriguing. No natural laws bind this form, only those of the mind. Its entry reads, "My form is whole again. I am perfect. You have proven worthy of true hatred." It is then that the SCP Foundation, our SCP Foundation, not the one responsible for creating 6820, realize what their unfortunate counterparts had been attempting to eradicate. SCP-6820-A was none other than the unkillable reptile, the great beast SCP-682 itself. It was a creature so powerful, so adaptable, so driven by hate, that the AI designed to contain it became just another way for it to destroy everything in sight. A page in the documents from the Lost Alternate Universe Foundation is an altered version of the original SCP archive entry for 682. In this version, the object class is listed as perfect, and the entity expresses its deep disdain for the Foundation and all its attempts to terminate the creature. Then the page shows a conversation log, much like that from the original entry, but with one notable exception. Using its new reality warping abilities, the creature formerly known as SCP-682 trapped Director Genevieve inside of its file. She found herself in an interrogation room, facing down the creature she had tried so hard to destroy. She cried out, We erased you! We erased you again and again from every place we could!" According to the conversation log, she begged the creature for an answer, but it refused. It filled the chamber with hydrochloric acid instead, listening to her agonized screams as she dissolved. Hopefully these documents and the failures of this alternate foundation serve as a reminder. Never underestimate the adaptability of SCP-682. Hate conquers all. Now go check out SCP-682 Ways SCP Foundation Try to Kill Hard-to-Destroy Reptile, and Most Dangerous SCP-682 Cross-Test Battles for more about the Foundation's never-ending war with this hard-to-destroy reptile.